You know, with production on House of the Dragons finally kicking into gear, it's got me thinking lately about the forthcoming show. Now thinking about it, and I'm sure someone has already stated this, I think the show's main title is perfect. Ever since it was first announced that the new Targaryen spin-off would be labelled House of the Dragon, I'm sure the question has crossed our minds, why not call it The Dance of the Dragons? That is the main storyline that the show will be exploring after all, so it would make sense that the whole premise of the main story you're telling be represented within the title itself. From an interconnected lens, this would also make sense, since, despite only being in minor moments, the show's events do have reference material from the main Game of Thrones show itself. The civil war of the Blacks and the Greens was first acknowledged during the 4th episode of the 3rd season. It would again be referenced later in the 9th episode of the 5th season, with the latter episode itself even sharing the same title as the conflict. With the Civil War being brought up by two of the main show's notable characters, those connections, though minimal in the grand overall story of Thrones, do hold a connection with the wider world of the universe HBO is clearly trying to build. So it would definitely help show-only audiences connect the dots in those trivial areas and earn a level of interest in the new product. However, despite all that, I do honestly believe House of the Dragon is perfect as a title. Why? Well, from a marketing standpoint, marketing the spin-off by its own original title not only allows the show to be its own thing and stand out in contrast to the book it's being based on, Fire and Blood, this also allows the showrunners to non-verbally show the general audiences that it will not be a straightforward adaptation of the source material. Taking away its fall from grace, the early seasons of Game of Thrones were some of the best television to watch during its time on air, but even back then, they were not straightforward recreations of the original novella. Liberties had to be taken so that the story could work and be delivered for a television audience. So it is without a doubt that the same thing will be occurring with House of the Dragon. The events of Dance is a conflict that, within the show's universe, run from 129 AC, after Conquest, to 131 AC, 3 years overall. So from a narrative standpoint, this time span could allow the show to run for, at the very least, maybe likely 3 seasons, 4 or even 5 at the longest, if they really want to stretch it that far. But if the show is very successful, and the audiences really want to see more, which I'm sure HBO also really want as well, then the series could not only be renewed and we could get the full story of the Civil War, but it could also be expanded further and go beyond that story as well. Just like how Thrones explored the fallout of the War of the Five Kings after Season 3, future seasons of House of the Dragon could go on to explore the further conflicts and consequences that followed in the aftermath of the Civil War. Notable events such as the Conquest of Dawn, the First Blackfire Rebellion, and the ones that followed, the War of the Nine Penny Kings, even the Rain Rebellion, and so forth. These are all events that could definitely be explored in their own way, and they could introduce characters that are quite familiar to audiences from the parent show of Thrones, since this is the point. It gets to that point eventually, where we're getting more closer to the timeline that we saw, or at least setting up events for the timeline that we saw. They could even add to it. They could create some show-only conflicts that could further enrich the world and the characters they've introduced, and the original characters that they will likely introduce as they go on, likely. Heck, if certain characters, plotlines, or concepts from any of the currently in development spin-offs, such as the Fleabottom-centric series, yeah, I don't know about that, but I'll probably talk about that another time. But if those shows do not take off, or get past their development stages, then they could easily find a way to incorporate those ideas and characters into House of the Dragon. By naming the spin-off House of the Dragon, HBO have made it clear that the narrative of the story is about one thing only: the Targaryens. And their story has a lot of rich material ripe for exploration in entertainment. A story that really doesn't stop until we reach the events of Robert's Rebellion. And we all know what follows from there. Honestly, overall, I hope this works out for the best. Despite how things ended with its parent show, House of the Dragon has potential. And if it's handled well, maybe it could hit the mark on the board and continue onwards for many seasons to come. Thrilling audiences like HBO once did before. I guess, really, at the very least right now, only time will tell.